Hello and welcome. Here's a step-by-step planning of a routine spacing case. So the first step, if you're using a 3Shape intraoral scanner and a 3Shape Ortho Studio, then your scans are actually integrated and all you do is select your communicate ID from your 3Shape intraoral scanner and just press send at the end of scanning, and the scan directly appears in your 3Shape Ortho Studio. So as we can see, you click on the case and you hit accept. The moment you hit accept, it appears directly as a patient file in the list of your patients. So you do not have to create a new patient ID. You do not have to import the scans step by step. As you can see over here, the scan has already appeared as the same name as it was appearing on your intraoral scanner software. All right, so we go to the first step. So normally when you receive a scan is a mesh file which cannot be 3D printed. So the step one of any aligner planning that you do is to create a closed model which is created with the vision that you want to 3D print it in future. So at this stage, you will decide that whether you would be doing horizontal printing or vertical printing. If you're going to do a vertical print for a case, you have that vision right now, and that's how you will go ahead and plan your case in future. So what we are doing right now, we are going to be using the auto segmentation feature of the new version of 3Shape Ortho Studio. The beautiful part about it is you do not have to mark the data on your scan. All you have to do is select the base safety margin of the gingiva or the margin away from the cervical margin that you want it to be covered in the whole model. So it uses that parameter and creates a beautiful closed horseshoe model for you, trimming all the excess data. Then the moment you go into the sculpt mode, in this step, if you're going to be vertically printing it, you will notice that the distal most end are not flat entirely. So what's going to happen is if you want to load it straight on a 3D printing plate or the printing plate of your 3D printer, it's not going to align very well. So at this stage, you take it into the side view, one of the side views. As you can see here, you go into the plane cut tool and you give a plane cut over here. You switch the orientation of cut and you give a horizontal plane cut. So most of our retention does not come from the distal end of the 7, and it comes from your attachments and the undercuts of your teeth. So it's okay if a small part of your 7 is sacrificed for this, because it is going to make your 3D printing process extremely predictable and fast, and you can achieve not only same but much more superior retention from adding attachments and using the other embrasures of the natural teeth. So we repeated the same process here, and you hit next. You go to the last step, which is validate and save. You hit save over here, and the moment the export is complete, you click done. All right, so now if you notice, it's no more a mesh. It's a closed model which can be 3D printed at our will. So the next step is to enter the clear aligner module. In this module, you would be setting up the orientation, the occlusal plane. You would be segmenting the teeth from the gingiva and then doing your core aligner planning. So the step one in the clear aligner module is going to be to set up the occlusal plane. So you mark 1, 6, you mark any point between 1, 1, 1, 2, and you mark 2, 6. You hit next, you come here, you again mark any center point between 1, 1 and 2, 1. You have to make sure that this line orients well so that the scans are also oriented well in the next step. So since we are going to be using the auto segmentation feature of the new Ortho Studio, you don't have to do anything. The software does everything for you. Of course, you need an active internet connection for it to perform this step, but normally this step for a person who's doing it probably for the first or the second time, or probably for the fifth time also, might take a minimum of 10 to 15 minutes, which happens over here in less than a minute. So the moment this is done, you hit next. It takes you to the rotation center. In my experience, the auto segmentation feature is so good that you don't have to modify anything else. You don't have to sculpt. It does everything for you, and you can directly hit next and it starts auto segmenting the lower arch. So once it's done segmenting the lower arch, you do the same steps. You hit next. It takes you to the rotation center. 99% of the times, in if your scan data is good, then you don't have to do anything over there. Normally in my cases, I do not use the ideal arch feature, so I just add a dummy arch and hit next, 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 and directly enter the designing phase. So this is the phase where you would do the true designing for, or the virtual alignment for that case. So I like to keep the constraints off and always try and have the perform collision detection on, so that it shows the diastemas and the intersections between the teeth. And you can even have the show collision values to be checked so that it shows it for each and every tooth. Otherwise, what would happen is it would show that only for, so if you keep it just one check, so it shows between two teeth, and the moment it's checked for all, it shows it in real time for all the teeth that you're going to be planning. So in this case, we will take up the lower arch as the first plan, and then, so if you notice, as per the current arch, I do not want to make any gross changes in my posteriors, because the patient's chief complaints are the diastemas in the anterior region and nothing posteriorly. So if you want to make any changes in the posterior segment, of course you will have to give some amount of cross elastics, and unfortunately that's not the patient's chief complaint. So we are going to focus right now on correcting what the patient has come to us for. So primarily taking these two central incisors. So as a thought process, if I want to derotate these central incisors, the biggest challenge that comes in derotating lower anteriors is the lack of surface area for the aligner to hold on to and to rotate or derotate it. So in this case, what we will first try and do is try and derotate it. So one of the key element to derotate any tooth is the lack of constraint. So as my first step, what I'm going to try is I'm going to create that space. Once I have created that space, and then sort of derotate it to end in a position where there won't be any constraint. So the patient doesn't have to come from time to time to get those spaces corrected or to get those spaces freed. So let's take this as the first step for optimum correction. We can simultaneously add some amount of retroclination over here. One of the key points that you should always remember in any form of aligner correction is overcorrection. The concept that is really going to help us achieve far superior results in future is the process of overcorrection. So at this point of time, I want to keep them slightly not intersecting with any of the teeth next to each other. So if you ever want to fine tune the left right movement or any of the movement, you can use the toggles over here. Sometimes because the mouse movement becomes very gross and you're not able to fine tune it, you can always use the movement toolbar over here. So looking at this, so this is where I want to end my first plan, optimally achieve this much, and then take it for refinement. So at this stage, if I have achieved a decent result, I can just stage it, and then in the next stage bring about the next correction of closing the diastemas more. Now let's go back to the upper arch. So if we notice, we do have to correct some amount of rotations between the laterals and the centrals. So we will again apply the same concept. Sometimes if you wish, which we will see over here, not to just rotate it like a couple and to have a pivot or a hinge type of rotation, we will see how to do that. For this lateral, I think it's better that it undergoes a normal rotation like this. All right, same for this. Okay, so let's have this central incisor. Do we need to correct the proclination drastically? Actually, no. They do not look extremely procline. So let's not change the torque a lot, and let's correct this by, so if you notice this central incisor, the second quadrant or the 2-1, you notice that if I derotate it like this, it's going to jut out from here, which is not what we want. So you can go to centers tab over here in the toolkit. You can click on the point at which you want to create the hinge. Then you can go to the movements tab and then double click the tooth and then double click the new point that you have created. And now you will see that the center of rotation has moved from the center of the tooth to the point that you have created, and you can give a hinge type of rotation movement at this stage. So the same thing we can do a little bit for the first quadrant central incisor. You go to centers, select the point of new rotation, go to movements, double click the tooth and bring about some form of mesial derotation. So once we are done with that, and if you want the center of rotation to move back, you just double click and you should be able to get that thing sorted. Okay, so at this stage, we can now try and get this canine slightly hinged in to have a better arch form. Okay, but that's creating a good amount of interference with the lower arch, so let's leave it. We do not want to create unnecessary interference between the upper and the lower. So let's have this rotated slightly. Let's give it a slight lingual tip. Same with this central incisor, slight lingual tip. Same with the other central. Same with this lateral. So the moment we do this, of course, we are seeing a lot of intersection between the upper and the lower, which is not what we want to achieve at the end of the procedure. So let's reduce the kind of correction that we have created. That's much better. Let's reduce this 0.35. Let's reduce this a little more. Let's reduce this a little. Okay, so Let's reduce the proclination slightly more. Okay, let's reduce this slightly. So we have a better arch form. Let's push this in a little bit. Okay, much better. So if at all, at any point of time, if you feel that the natural colors are more distracting, you can always go to change visualization settings over here. Click on show scanner acquired texture. So you uncheck that and you have a nice cartoon type of pink and white. So what this helps you achieve is much better contrast to sit and plan your case. So you can have a slightly tighter contact here, and so this could be our phase 1 where we achieve this with much more predictability instead of trying to correct. The beauty about in-house aligner is that you have total control over your entire treatment. So you can come here and you can check, okay, how many aligner is it showing with our conventional. In our routine scenario, we want to set the translation to about 0.25 and your rotation per aligner to about 1.5. It's not that you cannot increase that, you can always increase that, but that's going to stress your plastic a little bit more, eventually reduce the predictability of your treatment. So if at all you ever wish that, okay, from 1.5, I'm sorry, I want to make it to 2 degrees of rotation per aligner, you can see the direct change that has happened over here, which is about 8 aligners, which is not bad in my personal opinion. So what I would plan in this case is that this could be a good starting point where we sort of try and correct the patient's basic spacing and the excessive rotation that are there in the teeth. So if you want to ever check, you can check, for example, for the lower left first or the lower left central incisor, we are bringing about almost like about 12 degrees of derotation. Same is the case with the lower right central incisor. All right, so if we try and incorporate some amount of overcorrection factor over here, it wouldn't be a bad idea actually. All right, so let's do that and let's push this a little bit in. Same with this one. Let's push this also a little bit in. All right, and you can go back and check again. So whatever small changes you made has led to the aligner setups go from 8 to 9, which is fairly okay. So this looks okay as our plan 1. The reason we are not creating tight contacts at this stage is to avoid, I want to move this a little bit, correct this little bit over here to have a much better form. So if you notice, this patient has more or less like ovoidish teeth, which is giving a contact point over here. There's no point pushing these teeth against each other because that's how the morphologic anatomy of the tooth is. So the moment the tooth makes contact over here, it's not going to close anymore. So there's no point pushing it. So we as a clinician need to realize these things. Whenever you achieve a concrete treatment or finish a certain step, make it a habit to go to the save session and to save that step, so that if at all there is ever a possibility where your battery conks off or the software crashes, your work is at least saved at that stage and you do not have to repeat the steps again. All right, so this looks like a basic initial plan for us. From here, we are now going to try and add the necessary attachments. So let's take up the lower tooth. So there is a toggle which you can perform, show original position of teeth. You can turn this on, which shows what kind of movements are happening. So if you notice, our core movement is restricted to the incisors in the lower arch. So we will add two anchor attachments, probably one on the premolar, one on the molar, repeated on either sides. And we will add some attachments on the two central incisors at least, which will help us direct the rotational forces, and if possible we'll try to complement that with a negative attachment on the opposing side to create a nice couple to facilitate the derotation. Now let's evaluate the upper arch. In the upper arch also, we are primarily treating only the incisors. So the same anchor attachments will come on the first premolar and the molar. And since we are moving the true central incisors in the vertical plane, we want to have as much torque control as we can. So we'll put nice good long vertical attachments to control the torque of the teeth, or you can even put complementing attachments uh, in opposite direction, which is commonly known as the torque control or root torque control attachments, either of those, which would really facilitate the same movement. All right, so let's start with the lower. Let's take up. So you have to go to the attachments tab. You select the tooth. You select the attachment that you're going to put over here. All right, so you make it of the optimum size. You position it well. You can now deselect the center red dot allows you to move the entire attachment bodily. The green one elongates it, and the blue one actually helps you shove it into the tooth, which is what you need for optimum adaptation of the attachment. So this looks okay, slightly more parallel to the plane. Let's add one on the molar. Since they are just anchor attachments and not really facilitating in anything else, you can have the bevel in any direction. It doesn't matter. You want to use as much surface area as you can, because the better the retention of the aligner onto the teeth, the better is going to be the movement or the force applied in the anterior section. Okay, let's push it a little bit in. Looks good. Let's make it a little wider than before so that it has some surface area to withstand. Looks good. Let's repeat the same step over here. So if you notice over here, we are sort of changing, or we are tipping the two incisors towards each other. So I want to have a nice vertical attachment for my horizontal movement that I'm making. So instead of a semi-lunar type of an attachment over here, we've selected a rectangular beveled attachment, but using almost the entire length of the tooth to have very good tipping and very good vertical movement or horizontal movement. All right, let's repeat the same step on this incisor. Okay, so that should do the trick. let's see what kind of rotation are we bringing about. So this is going in, so if we have some push from here, it will facilitate this movement. This is coming in, so some push over here would facilitate the movement. So let's go and let's create a negative attachment over here. So we have a negative attachment. So as an experiment, what I'm going to try in this case is that I'm going to add a negative attachment on one incisor and not add on another, and then evaluate at the end of the treatment that is there a difference between the results that we have achieved as per its predictability, or there is no difference. So I think that would be a good way to evaluate whether is it really necessary, uh, or if the tooth can be grabbed by the aligner almost entirely, then the need for this is completely eliminated. So as much as it juts out is the kind of depth that it would have in its creation as a negative attachment. So if you want to have it minimal, you can reduce it like this, and it would act like a power ridge over here. All right, so this finishes our addition of attachments for the lower arch. So we can then move to the upper arch. So as I mentioned earlier, from time to time, please be in a habit of saving the session, which will really help. So let's go back, let's repeat the same steps for the molar and the premolar to add the necessary anchor attachments, and then we'll take up the anterior segment. All right, now that we are done with addition of the anchor attachments on the first premolar and the first molar, we will now take up the incisors. So let's toggle the original position of teeth on. So we definitely require two vertical attachments here. Let's see, what about the laterals? Laterals are generally the smallest teeth in the upper arch, which generally gets squeezed between the centrals and the canines. So it's always ideal to put at least some sort of attachments for laterals, whether you're bringing about any movement in them or no. So let's put two. To keep this case simple, let's try and have just vertical attachments. I hope whenever we finish the case, I will definitely try and post an update for this case. So stay tuned and subscribe to the channel so that whenever the update of this case comes, you can try and see that what we worked as a plan, to what extent it worked, and we can probably have a future video where we can try and compare the scans after the desired number of aligners, and then compare it using the special softwares to see how much of difference has come, or what kind of deviation is there between the virtual model of that number of aligner and the real scan after finishing those number of aligners. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's add a nice vertical attachment here. So let's try and use the beautiful surface area that is available for or by or in a central incisor. Looks good. Let's push it slightly so it's perfectly adapted to the tooth surface. Looks good. Unfortunately, most of the softwares do not have a, a way to get the exact dimensions of your attachment, so it's you always have to eyeball that. And honestly speaking, that feature does not exist honestly because it's not needed. If you put an attachment a millimeter larger than what you should have, nothing is going to happen. You're definitely going to have a good result. So uh, I think it's okay. A lot of times when you're initially starting with it, you feel that, oh, I don't know how big or small the attachment is going to be and stuff like that. But as you start doing it and as you start realizing that it's just important to add the optimal size of the attachment and not really the exact dimension between teeth. So if this attachment is smaller or larger than the other central incisor, it doesn't matter at all. All right. So let's add a small vertical attachment for this incisor too. So we could have selected some other attachment also, but for the sake of simplicity and also to prove a point that, see, at certain point, addition of attachment is way more important than selecting what attachment shape to put. A lot of times where we mess up, or where a lot of times while planning a designer messes up, is to miss putting an attachment. So to put an attachment is way more important. Please take that as a take home message rather than selecting a particular shape and so on and so forth. All right, so this looks good. If you ever have to make a choice between placing the attachments more cervical or more incisor, you will always select placing the attachment more incisor because that's where the aligner has maximum strength. So I think this looks good as the kind of attachments that we want to put for this case. I know it looks a little bit larger for the central incisors, but honestly speaking, as I mentioned, I always like to add optimal size of the attachments to achieve much predictable results. And generally the attachments are of the same shade as the teeth, so honestly it doesn't really matter so much. So there's something bothering me over here with this alignment, and I'm going to go to the movement tab and I'm going to slightly derotate this. Okay, now I remember I had just overcorrected that lateral incisor, so it's okay. I'm going to leave it as is right now. So as seen before, so one thing that you have to remember for this software, for 3Shapes Ortho Studio, is that if you created the subset earlier to evaluate or to make a video or stuff like that, and you added attachments later, you still have to go back and create the sub setups again, because if you don't do that, the attachments won't get attached to all your models. So that's something that you have to remember. So once you're done with this, you check your plan. This is the plan for 9 aligners, upper and lower, which is pretty good. And of course it's going to require some sort of refinement, and we are planning it that way. So you come here, you go to molars. So we are going to select the second premolar, where we would be adding the tooth number, so which you can see over here. All right, you go to ID tags, we clear, we add the patient's name here. You select sub setup title. I'm so sorry. You select sub setup number because that's what you want to add on the model, and it starts reflecting on both the sides, I mean both the arches as expected. So once you're done with this, you can go ahead and you can hit export. So in my experience, the software generally takes about close to the minutes equal to the number of aligners that it is exporting. So it takes about 7-8 minutes to export this case. Once it's done exporting, since we had used the auto segmentation feature in this and we have the hollowing and wax up selected over here, it's going to open in a new window where it's going to hollow our models automatically so that we can directly take the models for 3D printing. And it's also going to block out certain areas which requires blocking out, because otherwise the aligner is going to get in and get stuck over there. So which is according to me a game changer. When I moved from the previous version to this version, of course it uses a few CAD points and you get charged for it, but in my personal opinion this has reduced my working time by about 40 to 50%, because in normal case scenario I had to now go in and hollow out each and every model if I want to print hollow models. But over here, everything is ready and I can directly start slicing and printing the models. So I think it's a great feature for a very nominal fee. So please give it a shot. And if you feel that it makes your life easy, then it's your choice to select whether to spend that money and use that time to do something else, or if you definitely have someone to do that for you and you can employ someone who can do that and it can free up your time, you can definitely do that and not use the auto segmentation feature and get those things ready by an associate or another staff who's qualified enough to perform those steps for you, and you can focus on the planning part. So we'll now fast forward the entire process of the software processing and exporting, and then we'll directly reach the model hollowing and wax up window. So as you can see over here, we have now moved into a new window which is being called as the clear aligner mold adjustment window, which you can see over here too. In this window, what the software is doing is it's actually creating or adding virtual waxes to block out certain areas which need to be blocked out or which needed to be blocked out manually or in the earlier uh, versions of your software, or what you still require to do in a lot of different softwares other than 3Shape. So it's one of the only softwares that does this for you, which is a game changer. Now you imagine that you have this diastema on both the arches or in both the arches, and if you don't block that out, your plastic is directly going to go in between those spaces and it's going to become so thin that if you have an undercut of your incisors over here, it's not going to come out very easily, which you can see over here that it has a very good undercut of this incisor. So it's not going to come out very easily or it's not going to go in very easily. So if you don't block this out, you have two difficulties. One, the patient cannot put in or remove the aligners very easily and it becomes very, very thin over there, making it more prone to fracture in future. All right, so once you're done with this, so it does a little bit of wax up and you can change these values. According to me, I have found that that little bit of blocking out, of the unnecessary undercuts really facilitates the removal and insertion of the aligners, and eventually the entire retention comes from your good addition of your attachments and not from the true undercuts of the teeth. All right, so you have another tab called hollowing settings. So as you see, the models have been beautifully hollowed with a thickness of 2 millimeters, which is decided by us. You can make it 2.5 or 3 as per your will, but less than 2 millimeters is definitely not recommended. You hit next and you hit save. Do not forget to hit save, because if you click done over here, the models are not going to get saved. So the moment you hit save and it's done processing, then you can hit done and you move back to the first window from where we started our case. So at this stage, you can close this window, save and close it, and go back to your core window of the ortho analyzer, which is where you can find your exports as you see over here. So the last tab is exports and you can click on show in Explorer. The moment you do that, you have all the 9 sub setups that we had planned over here, and you select the maxillary and the mandibular STL files and take it for 3D printing. Now we normally use Cheeto Box as the slicing software for 3D printing. So as a continuation, we'll take up that if you want to 3D print about, so we are using a Sonic Mini 4K for printing of our models. So in this case, I would want to print about 8 models as my first set of prints to give it to my patient. So we enter sub setup 1, we select the maxillary and the mandibular models, and you drag drop it into your slicing software. Repeat the same steps with sub setup 2, same thing with sub setup 3, and same thing with sub setup 4. All right, so once you have added all the models that you intend to 3D print, you double click on a model, you hit flatten by face, and you hit the bottom part of it. So it will vertically orient itself to the build plate, and you keep repeating that for each and every model that you have added. So it's just a matter of practice. Once you are familiar with it, if you notice, it doesn't take a lot of time. So I personally like to align the maxillaries together and the mandibulars together because they have a similar angle that way, and it's much easier to align. All right, so Let's go and evaluate. Okay, let's see if we can get them to touch the build plate well. Let's see whether we can try and get it flattened on the plate somehow, but that's not happening, so that's okay. So we will start the moment you start seeing pink. That's where the software, that's where the models are going to go out of the build plate. So you want to stay where the models completely are visible and they are not pink and they are completely blue. So you start aligning them as close to them as possible without physically touching each other, maintaining some form of optimal distance between each. Okay, so if you noticed a minute back, it looked impossible to actually align these models and get them on this build plate to fit. But suddenly, if you align them well, it takes some minute, definitely, I wouldn't deny that. But once you do that, then it fits quite well. So I do have some space behind this, so I'm going to use that and I'm going to push this a little bit behind, push this a little bit behind. All right, so I think they look pretty okay. So now we want them to touch the build plate. So you select all and you go to the move tab and you move it in negative Z axis. The moment you see this red, all of them touching in red, that means they are all making contact with the build plate, but of course a part of it might be extruding through, which will not get printed. A small part of it might not get printed, but it's really not important. It's very important for the models to make full contact with the build plate. All right, so once you're done with this, you can actually, if you wish to, print it like this. Honestly, there are some studies which states that if you print a hollow vertical model like this, there is some amount of distortion that happens, which can be completely avoided if you add attachments to it or supports to it. So what we would do is we would add vertical supports to support the entire length of the models. You can even select auto addition of supports, but the thing that I have noticed, it somehow messes up and it's not able to realize that a support is touching a neighboring model, which is not good for it. So what I like to do is I like to go old school and I like to just manually randomly add the attachments in that absolute pink part. The pink part that you see is the absolute unsupported area in that model. Okay, so you want to randomly add a few attachments over here, which is eventually going to support that part of it when it's going to start printing. All right, so it's beyond my ability to cover more on 3D printing right now, but I still wanted to make sure that you have an entire workflow of the steps that are being done right from starting or importing a case ending till the slicing for 3D printing. So I hope this really helps and creates a guide for someone who's intending to start their in-house aligner setup. And if you ever wish to learn more about it, we conduct a lot of workshops on them and we conduct a full masterclass for 3 days where you can actually come down and we take you through each and every step, right from scanning to designing to 3D printing to thermoforming to trimming to packaging, everything. So if that's what interests you, our contact details would be there, or you can get in touch with us in the comment below and we would be more than happy to help you out with that. So if you see now, the entire 8 models are ready to get printed. So you can insert a USB stick. Now hit next, hit slice, Of course, it's going to tell you that some part of it is going out. Do not worry about it. It shows that it is going to consume about 65 ml of resin, and it's going to take 1 hour 50 minutes to actually print these 8 models, and the approximate cost is going to be about 130 bucks, which is nothing but approximately 15 bucks a model, which is negligible. All right, so you go to hit save, you label it as to what you are going to print. So I like to add the patient's name and the number of aligners that we are printing. You select the USB drive and hit save. Let the file completely write on the USB drive. Once this is done, you take your USB drive, you insert it into your 3D printer, select the file, and the printing starts, and rest everything happens automatically by the printer. All right, so I hope this was helpful. If you liked the video, please feel free to add a comment. We would really appreciate it. Hit the like button and share it with someone who can benefit from this. And if you want us to make a specific video on certain aspect, which was covered in this video, feel free to write or type in the comment below. We will be more than happy to create one for you. And thank you, and see you in the next one.